I'm Mae Finlayson. I'm doing a PhD research, practice-led research, which is making plus writing, a visual art project inspired by making, craft making, handmade stuff specifically, and domestic handmade items, not commercially produced. I'm looking at why we make when we don't really need to anymore, because we don't need to make utensils and things like that, but we still want to make. And I'm looking to discarded craft objects and unfinished craft projects that I'm finding in op shops to help me answer some of those questions. I'm particularly interested in discarded projects because they lend clues to why someone has chosen to engage in a project in such a time-consuming activity when it has been discarded or even unfinished. So I'm thinking, or I'm questioning whether it's what do we get from the act of making other than the actual final product, if they have been given away in abundance, and that's why I'm finding lots and lots of them. So that's a question. So what is happening? You know, what do we get from making and the process? I know from talking to people and my own experience, and I teach textiles and I've studied textiles for a long time and done workshops, so I've had a lot of experience with people and making. People make to relax, as a hobby. Some people say it's meditative and calming. And sometimes it's just also having control over something that doesn't have a deadline, or, you know, takes us away from our normal daily work life, say, takes stresses away. I'm really very interested in the unfinished craft project. That brings up a lot more questions, like what happened? Why was it not finished? I like to collect the objects from flea markets or op shops, so I don't have the story behind them. I'm assuming, I can only assume things from looking at these materials, and also why so many of these unfinished, particularly kit bought embroideries, that you have the picture and you fill in the picture with coloured thread. Why are there so many unfinished? What happened and what will happen to them in the op shop? So they're for sale again. I don't know. I'm collecting them for a research purpose and to look at them. Do people finish other people's unfinished projects? These are all questions, and if so, why? Which there are lots of answers for. Cost, they're very expensive to buy new, things like that. The thing that fascinates me, or is of particular interest in unfinished projects, is they could be looked at as small failures, or they could be flipped and seen as an aspirational, that they have some aspirational quality still in them, as in an unfinished project still has the potential to fulfill. It's not finished, so it still has that aspirational quality. Another thing I've found, which is interesting from a research point of view, is being able to track certain trends in domestic craft projects. At the moment, there are many, many long stitch projects that have been completed or incomplete. A long stitch is a round, usually round, image of cottages or kind of idealistic scenes. Long stitch means you can make it very quickly. So it was very popular, and it was very popular during the 80s and 90s. So now, quite out of fashion. You'd see them on people's walls, and now you don't. So I guess they've ended up in the op shops. Domestic handcrafts, especially textile, based projects have a very stereotypical association to femininity, which is something that I'm addressing in my project. And looking back, what began in Western culture anyway, hundreds of years ago, the fusing of gender and an activity, for example here, femininity and embroidery, were kind of constructed as a social tool to demark social status, divide classes, and branding embroidery and lace making as the gentle arts, which is, you often find it written about as the gentle arts. I mean, it's really made that stick, that stereotype, and still today. So as well as craft that is instruction-led, for example, kits stitched by colour kits, paint by number kits, I enjoy completed objects that may have been, as I can only assume this, may have been made irrespective of rules and skill levels. Objects that contain some kind of wild, instructionless, untamed making. For example, one of the objects I have here is a love heart pendant. It has rough seams and stitches really visible, so the making is very visible in this piece. It's a bit wonky. I see these as having a real authenticity about them, a real authenticity in these objects. And in comparison to that heart, I have collected this one, which some may say, if you're comparing the two, the level of sewing is better in this because it's neat. It still has its own specialness, but something about these reckless objects really appeal to me. I think it might be the rebelliousness or the impatience. You just want to make something and you'll grab whatever's around. I'm also interested in the nostalgic aspect to crafting and making, as in it comes up and repeats itself a lot. These puffy frames, I call them, were really popular when I was growing up, 80s and 90s. Everything could be covered in floral and lace. And I found a book that these instructions are from, and it was published in the early 90s, and it's called A Touch of Nostalgia, trying to create some kind of Victorian feel. These were made in the early 90s, and they have a nostalgic feel for me and people of my generation, and I'm finding these chucked out all the time as well. And just going back to the unfinished projects, or why I really love those, is because they're very familiar to a lot of people. It's important for my art to be familiar to people, and so people can enjoy it and engage with it. So I'll tell people I'm working with unfinished craft projects, and nearly everyone will say, "Oh, I have those." We all have them in the cupboards and in the drawers.